The blood trickled down Daisy Fletcher's chin as she stumbled through the darkened streets of Snowflake, Arizona Territory, 1879. Her bonnet, once a pretty shade of blue that matched her eyes, now hung askew, partially hiding the bruises that were already beginning to form. She had finally done. It fled the house she'd called home for 3 miserable years, leaving behind the man who had promised to cherish her until death parted them, but who had instead turned their marriage into a living nightmare. The summer night air was warm, but Daisy shivered as she made her way toward the edge of town. Snowflake was small, established just a few years prior by Mormon pioneers, but it was growing steadily as ranchers and farmers recognized the value of the fertile land near Silver Creek. Daisy had nowhere specific to go. Her parents had passed during the influenza outbreak 2 years ago, and her only sister had moved to California with her husband. She only knew she needed to get far away from Edmund Fletcher before he killed her. "Next time you burn my supper, I won't stop at just teaching you a lesson," he had snarled as his fists connected with her face for the 3rd time that evening. "Next time, I might just put you in the ground where ungrateful wives belong." Daisy's hands trembled as she touched her swollen eye. She could barely see out of it now. The physical pain was excruciating, but it paled in comparison to the ache in her heart. This wasn't the life she had envisioned when she'd accepted Edmund's proposal at 18. The charming businessman who had courted her with flowers and poetry had disappeared the moment the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, replaced by a cruel, controlling tyrant whose temper flared at the slightest provocation. As she reached the outskirts of town, Daisy realized she had no plan beyond escape. She had grabbed what little money she kept hidden, a mere $12.43, along with a small bundle containing a change of clothes and her mother's locket. It wouldn't last long, but perhaps she could make it to Holbrook and find work as a seamstress or laundress. The distant sound of hoofbeats made her heart seize with terror. Had Edmund already discovered her absence? She ducked behind a large cottonwood tree, pressing herself against the rough bark, praying whoever approached would pass by without noticing her. The rider slowed as he neared, and Daisy held her breath. Through her good eye, she could make out the silhouette of a man atop a large stallion. He wasn't built like Edmund, who was short and stocky. This man was tall and lean, his broad-brimmed hat casting shadows across his face in the moonlight. "Hello," called a deep voice. "Is someone there?" Daisy remained frozen, afraid to even breathe. "I don't mean no harm," the man continued, dismounting with a soft thud. "Thought I saw someone dart behind that tree. If you're in trouble, I might be able to help." Something in his voice, a gentleness that seemed genuine, made Daisy step hesitantly from her hiding place. The man's sharp intake of breath told her how bad she must look. "Good Lord, madam, what happened to you?" Daisy's voice caught in her throat. She'd never spoken aloud of Edmund's cruelty, had always made excuses about falling or running into doors. But something about this stranger's concerned expression broke through her shame. "My husband," she whispered. The man stepped closer, his movements slow and careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. In the moonlight, Daisy could see his face, now strong features, a day's worth of stubble on his jaw, and eyes that reflected both anger and compassion. "My name's Roy Macintyre," he said, keeping his distance. "I ranch about 5 miles north of here. Was heading home from delivering some cattle when I saw you. That man hurt you bad, didn't he?" Daisy nodded, tears spilling from her good eye. "You running from him?" Roy asked, his voice gentle but direct. "Yes," Daisy admitted. "But I don't know where to go. I have some money, but not enough to get far." Roy Macintyre studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "My sister Hannah lives at my ranch. She's about your age, I reckon. If you need a place to stay for a spell until you figure things out, our door is open." Daisy hesitated. Going with a strange man could be dangerous, but staying in Snowflake where Edmund could find her seemed far worse. "I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll be safe," Roy added, seeming to sense her uncertainty. "Hannah would skin me alive if I brought trouble to our doorstep, but I can't in good conscience leave you out here alone, not when you're hurt and scared." "Why would you help me?" Daisy asked, suspicious of kindness after years of cruelty. "You don't even know me." Roy's expression darkened. My ma suffered at my pa's hands for 15 years before he drank himself to death. I was too young to stop it then. I'm not too young now. A distant shout from the direction of town made Daisy flinch. That's Edmund, she whispered, panic rising in her throat. He must have discovered I'm gone. Roy didn't waste another moment. Can you ride? Daisy nodded. My father taught me. Then let's not linger. Roy led her to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion. This is Rusty. He's strong enough to carry us both until we're safely away. With surprising gentleness for his large hands, Roy helped Daisy onto the saddle before mounting behind her. He was careful not to touch her more than necessary, maintaining a respectful distance despite their close quarters. Hold tight to the pommel, he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. We'll take it easy until we're out of earshot, then make better time. As they rode away from Snowflake, Daisy felt a strange mixture of terror and relief. She was fleeing into the unknown with a man she'd just met, yet somehow felt safer than she had in years. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, following a path that wound through stands of ponderosa pine and across open meadows bathed in moonlight. The steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the warmth of Roy's presence behind her had an unexpectedly calming effect. When they finally approached a modest ranch house nestled against a hillside, lights still glowing in the windows despite the late hour, Daisy felt her muscles begin to unclench for the first time since she'd fled her home. A young woman with hair the same sandy brown as Roy's emerged from the house as they approached, a rifle held cautiously across her chest. "Roy, that you?" she called. "It's me, Hannah," Roy replied, dismounting and then helping Daisy down with the same careful touch. "I've brought someone who needs our help." Hannah Macintyre lowered her rifle when she caught sight of Daisy's face, her expression shifting from wariness to concern. "Oh, you poor thing. Come inside right away." The inside of the Macintyre home was modest but welcoming, with a fire burning low in the hearth and the scent of fresh bread lingering in the air. Hannah immediately set about heating water and gathering supplies to tend to Daisy's injuries while Roy stabled his horse. "Don't you worry about explaining anything tonight," Hannah said kindly as she gently cleaned the blood from Daisy's face. "Rest is what you need most. We can talk in the morning." Daisy was shown to a small but clean bedroom that Hannah explained had belonged to their youngest brother before he'd moved to California. The bed was soft, the sheets smelled of lavender, and for the first time in years, Daisy fell asleep without fear of what the night might bring. Morning brought sunlight streaming through curtains that Daisy hadn't drawn, illuminating a room that seemed almost luxurious in its simplicity after the chaos of her married life. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, then the events of the previous night came rushing back, along with the pain of her injuries. A soft knock at the door preceded Hannah's entrance, carrying a tray with breakfast and a steaming cup of coffee. "Thought you might prefer to eat in here this morning," Hannah said, setting the tray beside the bed. "Roy's already out with the cattle, but he asked after you before he left." Daisy touched her face gingerly. "I must look a fright." "Nothing that won't heal," Hannah assured her, though her eyes betrayed her anger at what had been done. "I've brought some arnica salve for the bruising. It helps, though it can't work miracles." As Daisy ate the simple meal of scrambled eggs and toast, Hannah sat in the room's single chair, her expression thoughtful. "Roy told me a bit about how he found you," she said finally. "Not much, just that your husband did this and you were running. I want you to know you can stay here as long as you need. We're a bit isolated, which might be good if you're worried about being found." Tears welled in Daisy's eyes. "I can't impose. I have some money I can pay for room and board until I find work." Hannah waved away the offer. "We'll not take money from you, but if you're able and willing, we could use help around the place. I do most of the cooking and housekeeping, but there's always more to be done than hours in the day." Relief flooded through Daisy. "I can cook and clean, sew and mend. I'm a decent baker too, though Edmund always complained my bread was too dense." A flash of anger crossed Hannah's face. "Well, Roy and I are grateful for any meal we don't have to prepare ourselves. Our standards aren't particularly high," she added with a warm smile. Over the next few days, Daisy settled into a routine at the Macintyre ranch. Her bruises began to fade from angry purple to yellowish green, and the swelling around her eye reduced enough that she could see properly again. She threw herself into helping Hannah with the household chores, grateful for the simple rhythm of honest work and the absence of criticism. Roy kept a respectful distance, often leaving before Daisy rose and returning for supper, tired and dusty from his work with the cattle. He was unfailingly polite, asking after her well-being but never prying into her past. Daisy found herself watching him when he wasn't looking the gentle way he treated his horses, his patience with a stray dog that had adopted the ranch, the quiet strength with which he carried himself. One evening, about a week after her arrival, Daisy was sitting on the porch swing, enjoying the cooler air that came with sunset. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her tense until she recognized Roy's distinctive silhouette against the darkening sky. He dismounted, removed his hat, and ran a hand through hair matted with sweat and dust. When he spotted Daisy, he offered a tired smile that transformed his weathered face. "Evening, Mrs. Fletcher," he said, using the formal address he'd maintained despite her presence in his home. "It's a fine night. Please," she replied, finding courage she didn't know she possessed, "call me Daisy. Mrs. Fletcher feels like someone I used to know." Roy nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Daisy, then, how are you healing?" "Better each day," she replied, touching her cheek self-consciously. "Hannah says the bruises are fading nicely." "They are," Roy agreed, leaning against the porch railing, "but I wasn't just asking about your face." The simple acknowledgement that her wounds went deeper than skin made Daisy's throat tighten. "Some days are easier than others," she admitted. "I keep expecting to wake up back in that house with him." Roy's jaw clenched. "He won't find you here, you have my word on that." "Thank you," Daisy said softly, "not just for the shelter but for not asking questions, for giving me time." "Time is something we have plenty of out here," Roy replied with a gentle smile. "No rush for anything." Later that night, as Daisy helped Hannah with the dishes after supper, she found herself asking about Roy's past. "He mentioned your father was difficult," she began cautiously. Hannah's hands stilled in the wash basin. "That's a kind way of putting it." "Pa was a mean drunk who used his fists more often than his words. Made Ma's life hell for years. Roy said he was too young to stop it then." Hannah nodded, her expression somber. "He was just a boy when the worst of it happened, 12 when Pa finally drank himself to death. But those years shaped him, made him determined to be a different kind of man." "He seems to have succeeded," Daisy observed quietly. "He has," Hannah agreed, a note of pride in her voice. "Roy's the best man I know, patient as the day is long unless he sees someone being mistreated. Then he's got a temper, but never turns it on those weaker than himself." She paused, studying Daisy thoughtfully. "He doesn't bring home strays often, human or otherwise, but when he does, they tend to find a permanent place here." Daisy felt her cheeks warm at the implication. "I don't intend to be a burden indefinitely. Once I've saved enough money, I'll move on." Hannah merely smiled and returned to her washing. "We'll see," was all she said. As the days turned to weeks, Daisy found herself blooming in the peaceful atmosphere of the Macintyre ranch. The constant fear that had been her companion for years gradually receded, replaced by a growing confidence in her own abilities and worth. Hannah became the sister Daisy had always wished for, teaching her to make soap from lye and fat, to preserve vegetables from the garden, and to shoot the small revolver she kept for protection. Roy remained a steady, reassuring presence, though Daisy noticed he began to find more reasons to be around the house, fixing a loose board on the porch, mending a chair that had been wobbling for months, building new shelves in the kitchen that Hannah had mentioned wanting. His eyes lingered on Daisy when he thought she wasn't looking, but he never overstepped, never made her feel uncomfortable. One afternoon in late August, Daisy was hanging laundry on the line when she heard the sound of an approaching wagon. Her heart leapt into her throat. Visitors were rare at the isolated ranch, and the fear that Edmund might have tracked her down never fully disappeared. She dropped the wet sheet back into the basket and hurried toward the house, intending to find Hannah, when Roy appeared from the barn, rifle in hand. He gestured for Daisy to go inside, his expression grave. Through the window, Daisy watched as a wagon came into view, driven by a man she didn't recognize, with a woman beside him. Relief flooded through her. It wasn't Edmund, but curiosity kept her watching as Roy greeted the visitors. After a brief conversation, Roy set aside his rifle and helped the woman down from the wagon. She was heavily pregnant, Daisy realized, and seemed to be in distress. Roy escorted the couple toward the house, his expression now urgent. "Daisy," he called as they approached. "We need help, Mrs. Miller here is having her baby, and they were trying to make it to town for the doctor." Hannah emerged from the chicken coop at the commotion, quickly assessing the situation. "Bring her inside," she directed, already rolling up her sleeves. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The Millers, Sarah and John, had been traveling from their homestead to Snowflake when Sarah's labor pains began, 2 weeks earlier than expected. With no hope of reaching town in time, they had stopped at the first ranch they found. While Hannah took charge of the birthing room, having assisted at several deliveries in the past, Daisy kept water boiling and linens clean. Roy and Mr. Miller waited anxiously outside, making awkward conversation between Sarah's cries of pain. As the sun began to set, the sound of a newborn's wail filled the house. Hannah emerged from the bedroom some time later, tired but smiling. "A healthy boy," she announced to the men. "Mother's doing well too, though exhausted." The relief on John Miller's face as he rushed to his wife's side brought unexpected tears to Daisy's eyes. She found herself standing beside Roy on the porch, watching as twilight settled over the land. "You were amazing today," Roy said quietly. Most women would have been frightened by such a situation. Daisy shook her head. "I was terrified, but Hannah knew what to do and there wasn't time to be afraid." "That's courage," Roy pointed out, "doing what needs doing despite the fear." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Roy spoke again, his voice hesitant. "Watching Miller with his wife and child, it reminded me that life can be good, even beautiful, when people treat each other with kindness." "Yes," Daisy agreed softly. "I'd almost forgotten what that looked like." Roy turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. "Daisy, I hope you know that not all men are like your husband. Some of us believe that strength is for protecting, not hurting." Daisy met his gaze, seeing the depth of feeling he typically kept carefully hidden. "I'm beginning to understand that," she whispered. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities, until Hannah called from inside that the Millers were settled and supper was ready. The Millers stayed for 3 days, until Sarah was strong enough to travel with her new son. During that time, Daisy observed the tender way John cared for his wife and child, the genuine partnership they seemed to share. It stirred something inside her, not just the pain of what she had lost in her own marriage, but hope for what might still be possible. On the morning of the Millers' departure, Sarah took Daisy's hands in hers. "I don't know what brought you to this ranch," she said quietly, "but I can see healing happening in you, and I can see how that man looks at you when you're not watching." She nodded toward Roy, who was helping John load the wagon. "Roy has been kind to me," Daisy acknowledged, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Kind is just the beginning of what I see in his eyes," Sarah replied with a knowing smile. "Just remember that you deserve gentleness, Daisy, we all do." As September rolled into October, the days grew shorter and the nights colder. Roy spent long hours bringing in the last of the hay and preparing the ranch for winter. Daisy found herself watching the horizon each evening, her heart lifting when she spotted him riding home. One crisp afternoon, as Daisy was gathering the last of the garden vegetables before the first frost, Roy appeared unexpectedly, leading his horse. "Thought I might ride into town tomorrow," he said, helping her fill her basket with carrots and late squash. "Need supplies before the weather turns." "Would you like to come along?" Daisy froze, fear clutching at her throat. She hadn't left the safety of the ranch since the night Roy had brought her here. I can't," she stammered. "Edmund might be there, he might see me." Roy straightened, his expression serious. "I've been making inquiries through friends in town. Edmund Fletcher left Snowflake nearly a month ago, told folks you'd abandoned him and he was heading to California to start fresh." The news hit Daisy like a physical blow. "He's gone," she whispered, unable to fully comprehend what it meant. "According to all accounts," Roy confirmed. Sold your house, settled his business affairs, and departed on the stage. No one's heard from him since. Daisy sank onto the ground, the basket of vegetables forgotten beside her. Freedom, real freedom, suddenly seemed possible. Not just hiding, but living without the constant fear of Edmund finding her. Roy knelt beside her, concern etched on his features. "I'm sorry, I should have told you more gently." "No," Daisy shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "These aren't sad tears, I just never thought. I never imagined I might truly be free of him." Roy's expression softened. "You deserve that freedom, Daisy, and more besides." She looked up at him, really looked at this man who had rescued her without asking anything in return, who had given her shelter and respect when she needed it most. Something shifted inside her, like a door long locked finally beginning to open. "I'll go to town with you tomorrow," she decided. "It's time I stopped hiding." The journey to Snowflake the next day was both terrifying and exhilarating for Daisy. Despite Roy's assurances about Edmund's departure, she found herself scanning the streets anxiously as they approached the small town, half expecting to see her husband's stocky figure emerging from the general store or saloon. Roy seemed to sense her apprehension, keeping close to her side as they made their rounds. They visited the general store for supplies, the post office where a letter from Roy's brother in California awaited, and finally the small cafe for a midday meal. As they sat across from each other at a corner table, Daisy was acutely aware of the curious glances from other patrons. Snowflake wasn't large enough for a stranger to go unnoticed, particularly one in the company of Roy Macintyre, who was well known in the area. "People are staring," she murmured, keeping her eyes on her plate. "Let them," Roy replied easily. "You've done nothing wrong." Before Daisy could respond, a woman approached their table, her expression a mixture of surprise and concern. "Daisy Fletcher, is that you?" Daisy looked up to find Martha Collins, the wife of Snowflake's only doctor and one of the few women who had shown her kindness during her marriage. "Mrs. Collins," Daisy acknowledged, her voice barely above a whisper. "My dear, we've been so worried," Martha said, genuine relief in her tone. "When Edmund said you'd left him, some of us feared the worst, especially given." She trailed off, her eyes flicking briefly to Roy. "Given what, Mrs. Collins?" Roy asked, his tone deceptively casual. Martha hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Well, it wasn't my place to interfere in a marriage, but I'd noticed bruises on more than one occasion when Daisy came to our socials. And there was that time she claimed to have fallen down the stairs, but her injuries." She shook her head. "Robert Doctor." Collins said they weren't consistent with a fall. Daisy felt shame wash over her, but Roy's steady gaze never wavered. "You have nothing to be embarrassed about," he told her firmly before addressing Martha again. "Mrs. Collins, as you can see, Daisy is safe and well. She's been staying at my ranch where my sister Hannah also resides." Martha's expression cleared at the mention of Hannah, propriety satisfied. "I'm so glad to hear it. And Edmund truly has gone, sold everything and left without a backward glance, though there were rumors." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Rumors that he owed money to some dangerous men, that his departure might not have been entirely voluntary." This was news to Daisy. Edmund had always portrayed himself as successful in his business dealings, though he'd kept the details from her, claiming a woman couldn't understand such matters. "Thank you for telling us, Mrs. Collins," Roy said politely, "and for your concern for Daisy's welfare." After Martha left, Daisy sat in stunned silence for several moments. "I had no idea about Edmund's debts," she finally said. "He was always so secretive about money." "Men like that often are," Roy replied. "Control is what matters to them, control of information, of people, of appearances." Daisy nodded slowly. "It makes sense now why he became more violent this past year. He must have been feeling the pressure of his financial troubles." She paused, then added quietly, "Not that it excuses what he did." "Nothing excuses it," Roy agreed firmly. "Nothing." As they drove back to the ranch that afternoon, Daisy felt as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Edmund was gone, and with him, the immediate threat of discovery and forced return. She could begin to think about her future in terms of choices rather than escape. "What will you do now?" Roy asked as they crested the hill that overlooked his property, the ranch house nestled against the backdrop of pine-covered mountains. Daisy considered the question carefully. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I have no claim to anything Edmund sold and no family to return to. I suppose I could look for work in a larger town, perhaps as a seamstress or shop girl." Roy was silent for a long moment, his hands steady on the reins. "Or you could stay," he said finally, his voice quiet but clear. "Not as our guest, but as part of our home. You've become important to Hannah, to both of us." Daisy's heart quickened at his words, at the meaning behind them that he wasn't quite expressing. "I wouldn't want to impose indefinitely." "It wouldn't be an imposition," Roy said, turning to look at her directly. "Daisy, I know it's too soon. You've been through a nightmare and you need time to heal, to find yourself again. But I want you to know that there's a place for you here if you want it, for as long as you want it." The sincerity in his eyes made Daisy's throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to say more without risking tears. Roy seemed to understand, giving her a gentle smile before returning his attention to the road ahead. That night, Daisy lay awake long after the household had gone quiet, thinking about Roy's words. In the 3 months since he had found her bloodied and terrified on the outskirts of town, he had never once made her feel indebted or expected anything in return for his help. He had simply offered what he had: safety, respect, and eventually, friendship, and now, perhaps, something more. The thought should have frightened her after what she had endured with Edmund. But instead, she found herself examining her own feelings with growing clarity. Roy Macintyre was nothing like the man she had married. His strength was evident in his patience, his kindness, his unwavering moral compass. When he looked at her, she didn't see possession in his eyes, but admiration, respect, and increasingly affection. Dawn was breaking when Daisy finally drifted to sleep, having made a decision that felt right in her soul. She would stay not out of necessity or fear, but because she wanted to see where this new path might lead. The following weeks brought a shift in the dynamic between Daisy and Roy. Nothing overt, nothing that crossed the boundaries of propriety, but a subtle acknowledgement of deepening feelings. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. Roy began to share stories of his childhood, of his dreams for the ranch, of the years spent building something he could be proud of after the chaos of his early life. Daisy, in turn, found herself able to speak about the darker parts of her marriage: the isolation, the fear, the gradual erosion of her sense of self under Edmund's control. Roy listened without judgment, his quiet anger directed solely at the man who had hurt her, never at her for the choices she had made. "I should have left sooner," she confessed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "But I kept believing he would change, that if I just tried harder was better somehow, the man I married would return." "That's what men like him count on," Roy replied, his voice gentle. "They make you believe their behavior is your fault. It's never the victim's responsibility to prevent the abuse." Daisy turned to him, surprised. "How do you understand it so well?" Roy's expression grew somber. "After Pa died, I spent years watching Ma blame herself for his cruelty. If only I hadn't burnt the bread, if only I'd kept the children quieter, as if his drinking and violence were somehow her doing." He shook his head. "It took me a long time to understand that nothing she could have done would have made him different. The poison was in him, not her." "Your mother was fortunate to have a son who understood," Daisy said softly. "I wish I'd understood sooner," Roy admitted. "Might have saved her some pain." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "That's why I couldn't ride past when I saw you that night. It was like seeing my Ma all over again and finally being old enough to do something about it." Impulsively, Daisy reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she had initiated contact between them, and the significance wasn't lost on either of them. Roy's fingers closed gently around hers, warm and calloused from years of hard work. "I'm glad you didn't ride past," she whispered. As November arrived with its shorter days and frosty mornings, the ranch settled into its winter rhythm. There was less work with the cattle, but more time spent ensuring firewood was stocked, equipment repaired, and food preserved for the months ahead. Daisy threw herself into these preparations alongside Hannah and Roy, finding satisfaction in contributing to the household that had become her refuge. On a particularly cold evening, with snow falling gently outside, the three of them sat around the fire after supper. Hannah was mending a shirt, while Roy whittled a small wooden horse, something he did to keep his hands busy in the evenings. Daisy had been reading aloud from a novel Hannah had ordered by mail, but had fallen silent, watching the snow through the window. "Penny for your thoughts," Roy said, noticing her distraction. Daisy smiled. "I was just thinking how different this winter feels from the last, how different I feel." "You've changed," Hannah observed. "When Roy first brought you here, you were like a shadow, so quiet, always trying to make yourself smaller. Now you fill a room with your presence." Daisy hadn't thought of it that way, but realized Hannah was right. The constant fear of saying or doing the wrong thing, of provoking Edmund's temper, had trained her to be as unobtrusive as possible. Here, she had slowly reclaimed her voice, her opinions, her laugh. "It's because I feel safe here," she acknowledged. "You are safe," Roy assured her, his eyes meeting hers across the room. There was warmth in his gaze that made her heart beat faster. Hannah looked between them, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "Well, I think I'll turn in early tonight," she announced, setting aside her mending. "Long day tomorrow with the soap making." After she had gone, a comfortable silence settled between Roy and Daisy. The crackling of the fire and the occasional soft tap of snow against the windows were the only sounds in the room. "I've been thinking," Roy said finally, setting down his carving. "Christmas is coming in a few weeks. Would you like to go into town for the celebrations? There's usually a dance at the church hall, and the ladies of Snowflake put on quite a feast." The idea of attending a social event, of being seen publicly alongside Roy, made Daisy's pulse quicken with both excitement and nervousness. "I'd like that," she said after a moment's consideration, "though I don't have anything suitable to wear to a dance." "I'm sure Hannah could help with that," Roy replied, "and if not, we could look in the shops when we're next in town." He hesitated, then added, "I'd be proud to escort you, Daisy, very proud indeed." The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, brought a flush to Daisy's cheeks. "Even though people will talk about me living here, about what happened with Edmund," Roy's expression grew serious. "Let them talk. Anyone who would judge you for escaping a man who hurt you isn't worth our concern." He moved to sit beside her on the sofa, close but not touching. "Besides, I reckon after 3 months of you living here with Hannah as chaperone, folks have already done their talking. Might as well give them something new to discuss." Daisy couldn't help but laugh at his pragmatic view. "And what might that be?" Roy's eyes held hers, suddenly intense. "How about the way I look at you? Because I'm finding it harder each day to hide how I feel, Daisy." Her breath caught in her throat. "And how is that?" "Like you're the sunrise after the darkest night," he said simply. "Like finding something precious I didn't even know I was searching for." Tears pricked at Daisy's eyes. After years of Edmund's manipulative words designed to control and diminish, Roy's honest declaration felt like cool water in a desert. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of you, never of you, but of trusting my own judgment again, of believing I deserve something good." "You do deserve it," Roy said firmly. "But I understand the fear. There's no rush, Daisy. I just wanted you to know where I stand. The rest is up to you in your own time." He made to rise, but Daisy caught his hand. "Roy," she said softly, "I feel it too, this thing between us. I'm just learning how to trust it." The smile that spread across his face was like the breaking of dawn. "That's all I could ask for," he replied, raising her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "That and the pleasure of your company at the Christmas dance." The weeks leading up to Christmas were filled with preparations, both practical and festive. Hannah helped Daisy alter one of her old dresses for the dance, a rich burgundy wool that complemented Daisy's fair complexion and brought out the blue of her eyes. The three of them spent evenings making paper decorations for the small pine tree Roy brought in from the forest, and baking cookies from Hannah's mother's recipes. On Christmas Eve morning, Daisy woke to the sound of excited voices from the kitchen. She dressed quickly and found Hannah and Roy admiring a beautiful new cooking stove that had somehow appeared overnight. "Merry Christmas," Hannah exclaimed when she spotted Daisy. "Look what Santa brought us." Roy's expression was a mixture of pride and shyness. "Been saving for it all year," he explained, Hannah's been complaining about the old one since last winter. It's magnificent, Daisy agreed, running her hand over the gleaming surface. What a wonderful surprise. That's not all, Hannah said, her eyes twinkling. Roy has something for you too. Roy shot his sister an exasperated look, was planning to wait until tonight after the dance. Well, I'm going to fetch more wood for this beautiful stove, Hannah announced, clearly giving them privacy. Take your time. After she had gone, Roy cleared his throat nervously. It's nothing grand, he warned as he reached into his pocket. But when I saw it in the Mercantile last month, I thought of you immediately. He held out a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a simple string. Daisy took it with trembling fingers, overcome by the realization that this was the first genuine Christmas gift she had received in years. Edmund's gifts had always been calculated to emphasize her shortcomings or demonstrate his control a cookbook when her meals disappointed him. A dress he insisted she wear though she found it uncomfortable. Carefully unwrapping the package, Daisy gasped when she saw what lay inside. A delicate silver brooch in the shape of a daisy, small but exquisitely crafted with a tiny pearl at its center. Roy, she breathed, it's beautiful. Not as beautiful as its namesake, he replied softly. I wanted you to have something that's just for you, not practical or necessary, but simply because it might bring you joy. Tears welled in Daisy's eyes as she realized how completely he understood what she needed, not just safety and kindness, but the freedom to exist beyond utility, to be valued for herself alone. I love it, she whispered, looking up to meet his gaze. And I. She hesitated, the words she wanted to say catching in her throat. It was too soon, too frightening to voice the feelings growing stronger each day. Roy seemed to understand, as he always did. You can pin it to your dress for the dance tonight, he suggested, filling the silence. If you'd like to. I would like that very much, Daisy agreed, grateful for his patience, for the way he never pushed beyond what she was ready to give. The church hall was transformed for Christmas Eve, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, candles in every window casting a warm glow over the festivities. As Roy helped Daisy down from the wagon, she felt a flutter of anxiety at the prospect of facing the town's scrutiny. But the brooch pinned to her dress gave her courage, a tangible reminder of the man beside her and the new life she was building. Hannah had insisted on remaining at the ranch, claiming a headache, though Daisy suspected she was giving them the opportunity for a proper courtship away from her watchful eyes. It was both thrilling and terrifying to walk into the hall on Roy's arm, aware of the curious glances and whispered comments their arrival provoked. Martha Collins was the first to approach them, her welcome seemingly genuine. Daisy, how lovely to see you again, and looking so well. She admired the altered dress with an appreciative eye. Burgundy suits you beautifully. Other townspeople gradually came to greet them, some out of genuine warmth, others clearly driven by curiosity. Roy remained steadfastly at Daisy's side, his quiet presence a source of strength as she navigated the social currents. When the small band struck up a waltz, Roy turned to her with a questioning look. Would you care to dance? Daisy hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd like that. As they moved onto the floor, Roy's hand at her waist was light, respectful, yet she could feel the warmth of it through her dress. He led with surprising grace for a man who spent his days on horseback, guiding her through the steps with gentle confidence. You dance beautifully, Daisy remarked, surprised. Roy's lips quirked in a small smile. Ma insisted all her boys learn, said no son of hers would stand like a fence post at social gatherings. The image made Daisy laugh, the sound rising freely from her throat. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed at a dance. With Edmund, such events had been exercises in anxiety, every interaction scrutinized, every misstep punished later in private. I like the sound of your laugh, Roy said softly. It's like music. Daisy felt herself blush, but didn't look away from his admiring gaze. You make it easy to find reasons to laugh. They danced twice more before taking a break for refreshments. As Roy went to fetch them punch, Daisy found herself approached by the town's minister, Reverend Wilson. Mrs. Fletcher, he greeted her formally, it's good to see you among us again. "Thank you, Reverend," Daisy replied cautiously. The minister had been one of those who had seemed to accept Edmund's explanations for her occasional bruises without question. "I must confess, I was concerned when I heard you were residing at the Macintyre ranch," he continued, his tone suggesting disapproval beneath the politeness. "A young woman in your situation must be careful of appearances." Before Daisy could respond, Roy appeared at her side, handing her a cup of punch. "Evening, Reverend," he said pleasantly. "Enjoying the festivities, indeed," the minister replied, though his expression remained stern. "I was just expressing to Mrs. Fletcher my concern for her reputation, living as she is without the protection of a husband or father." Roy's expression didn't change, but Daisy sensed the tension in him. "Mrs. Fletcher has the protection of my roof and my name, Reverend. And more importantly, the protection of her own courage in removing herself from a situation where her very life was in danger." His voice remained even, but there was steel beneath the civility. "As Christians, shouldn't our concern be for her safety rather than appearances?" The minister had the grace to look somewhat abashed. Of course, I meant no offense. It's just that people talk, and I would hate for Mrs. Fletcher's reputation to suffer further." "The people who matter know the truth," Roy replied firmly. "As for the rest, I find I care less for their opinions with each passing day." He placed a protective hand at the small of Daisy's back. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe they're starting the Virginia reel, and I promised this dance to Mrs. Fletcher." As he led her away, Daisy felt a surge of gratitude and admiration for the way Roy had defended her without anger or insult, standing firm in his principles while maintaining his dignity. "Thank you," she said as they took their places for the dance, "for what you said to Reverend Wilson." Roy's expression was one of genuine puzzlement. "No need for thanks, I only spoke the truth as I see it." Still, not many men would stand up to the minister on behalf of a woman with a complicated past. "Your past isn't complicated, Daisy," Roy said firmly. "You were hurt by someone who should have protected you, and you found the courage to save yourself. There's nothing complicated about that." The simplicity of his perspective, the way he cut through the social expectations and judgments to the heart of what mattered, made Daisy's chest tighten with emotion. As they joined hands for the dance, she knew with sudden clarity that she was falling in love with Roy Macintyre not with gratitude or desperation, but with the sure and steady certainty of a woman who finally recognized what love should feel like. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of music, laughter, and the warmth of Roy's presence. By the time they began the journey home, snow was falling again, large flakes drifting lazily through the darkness. Roy had tucked a warm buffalo robe around Daisy to protect her from the cold, and she nestled beneath it, content despite the chill in the air. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Roy asked as the horse plodded steadily through the gathering snow. "More than I expected to," Daisy admitted. "It was healing in a way to return to town not as Edmund's property, but as my own person." "You've never been anyone's property," Roy said with quiet conviction. "Not even when he tried to make you believe you were." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the soft thud of the horses' hooves in the snow. The moon broke through the clouds occasionally, casting silver light across the white landscape. "It's beautiful," Daisy murmured, gazing at the pristine snow covering the hills. "Like the world is being made new." Roy glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "That's what I feel has happened at the ranch since you came," he said softly, "like something new and precious is beginning." The warmth that spread through Daisy at his words had nothing to do with the buffalo robe. "I feel it too," she admitted, finding courage in the darkness and the gentle falling snow. "This feeling between us, it's not like anything I've known before." Roy drew the wagon to a halt, turning to face her fully. "Daisy," he said, his voice low and serious, "I need you to know something. What I feel for you, it's not pity or some misguided desire to rescue you. It's admiration for your strength, respect for your heart, and something deeper that grows stronger every day." Daisy's breath caught in her throat. "I've been afraid," she confessed, "afraid that what I feel might be just gratitude or that I might be too broken to love properly again." You're not broken, Roy said fiercely. Wounded, perhaps, but healing, and what's growing between us feels real to me, real and right. In the moonlight, his face was both familiar and new, the face of a man she had come to trust with her safety, her thoughts, and perhaps now her heart. Without overthinking, Daisy leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but it sent a current of warmth through her that had nothing to do with fear. When she pulled back, Roy's expression was one of wonder and tenderness that made her heart skip. "I've been wanting to do that for quite some time," he admitted, a smile tugging at his lips. "I'm glad I didn't make you wait any longer," Daisy replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Roy laughed softly, the sound rich and warm in the winter night. "Daisy Fletcher, you continue to amaze me." He gathered the reins again, but not before pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Now let's get home before we freeze out here, or Hannah sends out a search party." The rest of the journey passed in a comfortable silence charged with new awareness, both of them smiling like fools in the darkness. As winter gave way to spring, the relationship between Daisy and Roy blossomed alongside the wildflowers that carpeted the meadows around the ranch. Their courtship was conducted with proper restraint. Hannah's presence ensured that, but was filled with small moments of connection. Shared glances across the dinner table, hands touching while passing the salt, quiet conversations by the fire after Hannah had gone to bed. For Daisy, it was a revelation to be courted with such patient respect. Roy never pushed for more than she was ready to give, seemed content to let their relationship unfold at its own pace. Yet there was nothing lukewarm about his affection. His eyes followed her around a room, his smile brightened when she entered, his attentiveness never wavered. By April, when the last snow had melted and the cattle were being moved to higher pastures for summer grazing, Daisy had been at the Macintyre ranch for nearly 9 months. The woman who had arrived broken and terrified was barely recognizable in the confident, smiling person who now moved about the property as if she belonged there because she did belong, in every way that mattered. One warm afternoon, as Daisy hung laundry on the line, enjoying the feel of sunshine on her face after the long winter, she heard the now familiar sound of Roy's horse approaching. He wasn't expected back until evening, having ridden out at dawn to check the northern boundaries of the property. Shading her eyes against the sun, she watched as he dismounted and approached, his stride purposeful. There was something different about him today, a nervous energy she hadn't seen before, a determined set to his shoulders. "You're back early," she greeted him with a smile. "Everything all right with the boundary line, all in order," Roy confirmed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I finished quicker than expected and—" He trailed off, seeming uncharacteristically at a loss for words. "And," Daisy prompted, setting down her laundry basket. Roy took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders like a man preparing to face a firing squad. "And I decided it was time I stopped being a coward and asked you a question I've been wanting to ask for months." Daisy's heart began to pound as Roy stepped closer, taking both her hands in his. "Daisy Fletcher," he began, his voice steady despite the nervousness evident in his eyes, "these past 9 months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and laughter to this ranch, strength and grace to every day. I know you've been through hell, and if you need more time, I understand. But I can't keep my feelings to myself any longer." He paused, swallowing hard. "I love you, Daisy, with everything I am, I love you. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days showing you what love is supposed to be." Tears welled in Daisy's eyes as Roy dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Will you marry me?" he asked simply. "Not because you need protection or a place to stay, but because you want to build a life with me as my partner and my equal?" For a moment, Daisy couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat. The contrast between this proposal and Edmund's, which had been more a statement of intent than a question, was stark. Roy was offering her a choice, not an obligation, partnership, not possession. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Roy, I love you too." The joy that blazed across his face was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. He rose to his feet and, with a gentleness that belied his strength, drew her into his arms. This time when they kissed, there was nothing hesitant about it. Daisy wound her arms around Roy's neck, pouring 9 months of growing feelings into the embrace. They were interrupted by the sound of applause from the direction of the house. Breaking apart, they turned to see Hannah standing on the porch, grinning widely. "About time," she called, wiping what looked suspiciously like tears from her eyes. "I was beginning to think I'd have to propose for him, Daisy." Roy laughed, keeping one arm firmly around Daisy's waist. "You knew I was planning this today." "Brother, you've been carrying that ring in your pocket for 2 weeks, working up the courage," Hannah replied with fond exasperation. "Of course I knew." Daisy looked up at Roy in surprise. "You have a ring." Roy's cheeks reddened slightly as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "It was my mother's," he explained, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small, perfect diamond. "Pa gave it to her before he changed when there was still love between them. She left it to me when she passed, said it represented what marriage should be, not what hers became." As he slipped the ring onto Daisy's finger, the diamond catching the afternoon light, she was struck by the symbolism. A ring that had witnessed both love's promise and its perversion, now given new meaning, new hope. "It's perfect," she whispered, looking from the ring to the man who had given it, whose eyes held nothing but adoration and respect. "Come on, you two," Hannah called, breaking the moment. "This calls for celebration. I've got a pie cooling on the windowsill, and I reckon we can open that bottle of blackberry wine we've been saving." As they walked hand in hand toward the house, Daisy felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The journey from that terrified woman fleeing into the night to this moment had been long and often painful, but standing here with Roy's hand warm around hers, she wouldn't change a step of it. They were married on a perfect June morning, with wildflowers adorning the small church in Snowflake. Hannah had insisted on a proper wedding, not just a quick ceremony before the justice of the peace as Roy had initially suggested, wanting to spare Daisy any discomfort. "Nonsense," Hannah had declared when the subject arose. "Daisy deserves a beautiful wedding day with a new dress and flowers and cake. She never got to enjoy her first one, from what I gather." And so Daisy found herself standing before the church mirror in a gown of ivory silk that Hannah had helped her make, her hair crowned with a wreath of daisies and blue forget-me-nots. The face that looked back at her bore no resemblance to the bruised, terrified woman who had fled Snowflake almost a year ago. Her eyes were clear, her smile genuine, her spirit whole. "You look beautiful," Hannah said, adjusting the wreath carefully. "Roy's going to stop breathing when he sees you." "I still can't quite believe this is happening," Daisy admitted, "that I could be this happy, this lucky." "It's not luck," Hannah corrected gently. "It's what you deserve, what you've earned through your own courage." She squeezed Daisy's hand. "Now, are you ready to make my brother the happiest man in Arizona territory?" The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. Dr. Collins gave Daisy away, having become a friend and supporter in the months since her return to town. The congregation was small but sincere in their well wishes, the town having gradually accepted the truth about Edmund and embraced Daisy's new beginning. When Roy took her hands before the altar, his eyes never leaving hers as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all his days, Daisy felt the last shadows of her past finally lift. This was what marriage should be: a covenant between equals, founded on respect and genuine affection. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Wilson declared, his earlier reservations apparently overcome. "Mr. Macintyre, you may kiss your bride." As Roy's lips met hers, sealing their vows with a kiss that was both tender and promising, the congregation erupted in cheers and applause. Daisy felt herself blushing as they turned to face their friends and neighbors, but Roy's hand was steady in hers, his smile radiating pride and joy. The celebration afterwards at the ranch was everything a wedding party should be: filled with laughter, good food, music, and genuine goodwill. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit in the yard, and neighbors who had brought fiddles and guitars struck up tunes for dancing. Roy led Daisy onto the makeshift dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. "Happy, Mrs. Macintyre?" he asked, the new name making her smile. "Happier than I knew was possible," she replied honestly. "And you?" "I keep thinking I might wake up and find this all a dream," Roy admitted, his arms tightening slightly around her waist. "Having you in my life as my wife, it's more than I dared hope for." As they swayed together under the stars, Daisy rested her head against Roy's chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. This was what safety felt like, she realized. Not the absence of danger, but the presence of love that asked nothing in return except itself. Later that night, after the guests had departed, and Hannah had tactfully announced she was spending the night with friends in town, Roy carried Daisy across the threshold of the bedroom that would now be theirs together. He had prepared it carefully, with fresh linens on the bed and wildflowers in a jar on the bedside table. Daisy felt a flutter of nervousness as Roy set her gently on her feet. Her previous experience of marriage's physical aspects had been largely unpleasant, sometimes painful, always centered on Edmund's desires rather than mutual pleasure. As if reading her thoughts, Roy took her hands in his expression serious. "Daisy, I want you to know something. Nothing happens tonight or any night that you don't want. Your comfort, your pleasure, they matter to me. We have all the time in the world." Tears pricked at Daisy's eyes at the simple consideration that Edmund had never shown. "I trust you, Roy," she whispered. "I'm not afraid, not with you." And she wasn't, she realized as Roy drew her into his arms with infinite gentleness. This man who had never raised his voice to her, who had shown nothing but respect for her boundaries and wishes, would never hurt her. The knowledge freed something inside her, allowing her to respond to his kisses with a passion she hadn't known she possessed. What followed was a revelation, an experience of intimacy so different from her past that it felt like discovering an entirely new aspect of being human. Roy was patient, attentive, his focus entirely on her comfort and pleasure. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with a sense of rightness, of completion, that left Daisy breathless with wonder. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together in the moonlight filtering through the curtains, Roy traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "More than I have words to say." Daisy turned in his arms, pressing a kiss to his chest, right above his heart. "I love you too," she replied, the words coming easily now without fear or hesitation. "Thank you for showing me what that really means." Roy's arms tightened around her, and in that embrace, Daisy found everything she had ever longed for: safety, respect, passion, and above all, love freely given and received. The years that followed brought changes to the Macintyre ranch, some expected, others surprising, all welcomed. Hannah married a schoolteacher from Holbrook the following spring, moving into town but returning often to visit. The small ranch house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Roy and some neighbors raising a new wing during a 3-day barn raising that became something of a local legend. In the summer of 1881, Daisy gave birth to their first child, a son they named James after Roy's father, hoping to redeem the name through a boy raised with love rather than fear. 2 years later, a daughter followed, Sarah, named for the woman whose childbirth at the ranch had helped forge the beginning of Daisy and Roy's romance. Through it all, their partnership only strengthened. Roy never became the domineering husband Daisy had once feared all men must be. They made decisions together, shared the work of the ranch and the raising of their children, supported each other through droughts and harsh winters, and all the challenges life in the Arizona territory could bring. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, 5-year-old James teaching 3-year-old Sarah how to twirl a small lasso Roy had made for him, Daisy was struck by the fullness of her happiness. The setting sun painted the landscape in gold, the same color as the wildflowers that dotted the meadow beyond the house. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Roy asked, his hand finding hers as it always did when they sat together. "About that night you found me," Daisy replied honestly. "How close I came to never knowing this life, this joy." She turned to look at him, this man whose kindness had saved her in more ways than one. "Do you remember what you did when you first saw my face in the moonlight?" Roy nodded, his expression somber at the memory. I remember. Your eyes were so swollen from his fists I could barely see the blue of them. And you kissed them, Daisy continued softly, so gently like I might break. Then you promised me peace. She smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. You've kept that promise, Roy Macintyre, every day since. Roy raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. Easiest promise I ever made, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life, Daisy. As the children's laughter filled the evening air, Daisy leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, grateful beyond words for second chances, for courage found in desperate moments, and for the man beside her who had shown her that love, real love, was not about possession or control, but about freedom. The freedom to become her truest self, safe in the knowledge that she was cherished exactly as she was. And in that knowledge, Daisy Macintyre found a peace so profound that the scars of her past, while never forgotten, no longer defined her. She had become not just a survivor, but a woman who had rediscovered joy, who had built a life filled with purpose and love, a life she had once thought forever beyond her reach. As twilight deepened into night, Roy put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close as they watched the first stars appear above their home. Their children raced toward them, laughing, demanding one more story before bedtime. And in that perfect moment, surrounded by the family they had created together, Daisy felt the final piece of her heart heal not into what it had been before, but into something stronger, wiser, and infinitely more capable of love.